Life as a sugar baby was interesting to say the least. I was able to try new things, visit new places, and experience things I'd never thought was possible. Before we go into how I ended up being a sugar baby, a working girl, or an escort, if you will, I have to take you to the beginning. I grew up watching programs that were not intended for children. One of my favorite movies to this day is Moulin Rouge, a film about a tragic love story where the main character, Satine, a beautiful French can-can dancer, slept with men for money and gifts, often jewels. This glamorized life of dancing, parties, men, and money was packaged in such a way that I really loved the idea to be Satine. The costumes, the colors, the music, and the glamour were all so inviting. I watched The Girls Next Door, a show that chronicled the life of porno emperor Hugh Hefner and his 3 girlfriends, Holly, Bridget, and Kendra. They were funny, bubbly, and of course beautiful. This was another example of beautiful women using their looks to get money, fame, and attend parties. Anna Nicole Smith and her relationship, Paris Hilton and her sex tape. This was major news, and once again glamorizing beauty, rather sex, as a means to be taken care of. Now, of course, my sexual abuse was ongoing at this point, so I thought to myself I would have no problems pleasing an older man. As sick as that sounds, it was a thought that if they could do it, so could I. I wanted to escape my world and go to the parties of Hollywood. The flashing lights and glamour made my world seem like hell, while they did the same thing but was rewarded with riches. A warped sense of self and reality, you see, but as a child who was looking for an escape, I relied on the skills that I had. For me, it was sex. I told myself I would be like the women I idolized, that I would find a man to take care of me, an idea that was fed down all our throats through the media. From Disney princesses to reality stars with no talent, the seeds were planted. A man can and will take care of a beautiful woman, so long as she takes care of him. I moved out at 18 and jumped into a toxic relationship with a felon almost 10 years my senior. I hadn't found my voice yet or my value and did whatever it took to please him. I ended up taking care of him in many ways, as it was very difficult for a convicted felon to find consistent work. At 18, I was paying for our rent, food, car, and insurance. After 3 years, I had finally had enough. I had just turned 21 and was eager to go out and experience life as an adult. Clubs and parties, the normal activities someone my age found exciting. I moved to a studio apartment and focused on my newfound freedom and being single and legal. Nightlife was my escape, and I found getting drunk and partying to be the only thing I wanted to do. Unfortunately, the cost to party every weekend and paying my bills started to take its toll on my finances. I began to get further and further behind on my responsibilities, yet didn't want to change my lifestyle. As a 21-year-old, who wants to be responsible? I remembered the women from my childhood, the beautiful blondes and the men who took care of them. So I set out to finally be taken care of. I vowed to never take care of a man again, that I would be the one to be supported. My mission was to be a cupped woman. Before becoming a sugar baby, I decided to set some rules. Rule number 1, if I wouldn't sleep with you for free, I'm not sleeping with you for money. Number 2, always have protected sex. Number 3, tell someone who and where I'm meeting. Number 4, always meet in public. Number 5, never do something you are not comfortable with. And number 6, never meet for free. $500 minimum for dinner, and then we can discuss the rest after. I joined an online site that facilitated the arrangement of young women's company for a fee. It was not long before I had my first date. Bryn was a 35-year-old married father of 5. It was hard for me at first to justify my involvement with a married man, but he reassured me if it wasn't me, then it would be someone else. This was an idea I pushed in the back of my mind and agreed to create our fantasy together. This brings me to the first aspect of being a sugar baby that I enjoyed. We built our own world, a world where he wasn't married, didn't have children, a place for him to recapture his youth and feel alive from the thrill of a taboo relationship. I was loved and showered with gifts. I fooled myself in believing that what I was doing wasn't wrong and that I was somehow helping him cope with the stressors of his mundane life he had grown to resent. that having me in his life allowed him to go back to his family and be able to be present and not dread the normal day-to-day rat race he was in. Of course, looking back, this was not true. I was used and he was selfish. I would later come to feel guilt for borrowing him over the course of our relationship. He didn't belong to me, and though I didn't make the commitment, I still knew what we did was wrong. Bryn and I hit it off very well. He took me on business trips and to fancy dinners. We would stay in the nicest suites and fanciest hotels. A real scene from Pretty Woman. It wasn't long before Bryn offered to get me an apartment closer to him. Of course, in true style, I was put up in an area that I would never be able to afford alone. I was working as a receptionist and a bottle girl, just enough to pay my car, cell phone, electric, and internet. Bryn would pay my rent for a total of 8 months, and our affair would eventually fizzle out. The newness of his toy had finally begun to wear off. He stopped coming to see me less and less, though he still made deposits to my account. Then one day, with 3 months or 4 left on my fancy apartment lease, the deposits stopped. I was cut off, blocked, and unable to contact him. I found myself in trouble. I panicked. My first experience of being a sugar baby had been so well. I had money in the bank, dresses, shoes, and anything I could want. Then, as if the lights were shut off, I was alone in the dark in an apartment I couldn't afford. I got back on the site and frantically looked for another sugar daddy. The men I was meeting were not wanting an ongoing fling. They wanted to hit and quit, if you will. So here I am, finding myself in a position as a full-on escort. Desperate to preserve my credit, I would amend the rules I had set for myself and do what it took to keep the lifestyle I had come accustomed to. This is when I started to travel. I was flown to Miami, Houston, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas, meeting men from all over the world. There was one, a divorced father of 2 from Canada, who would fly me to Vegas when he was in town. This was an experience I enjoyed. I was paid a daily rate, travel, and food, as well as play money for the slot machines. He took me to see Britney Spears and went out of his way to ensure I had a good time. I had my own room and could come and go as I pleased. These 3 days in Las Vegas was more than enough, and the money I had made was worth bending my first rule. I wouldn't say he was terribly unattractive, but he wasn't a looker either. It was clear I was paid to be there, though it didn't bother us. Miami was my next stop. A handsome business owner flew me out to experience Miami for the first time. We stayed in a 3-story penthouse off Collins Street in the thick of downtown. I was able to give him a wonderful first night that my sexual services weren't needed for the rest of the trip. By this point, I was able to get out of my lease and move to an apartment I could afford without a man. So is this what I finally stopped being an escort? Nope. I had become addicted to the thrill. It was intoxicating to demand a price for your time and your body. I was able to negotiate and barter and sell myself. I enjoyed the thrill of telling a man he couldn't afford me, not to mention the fancy dinners and nice gifts. I was seeing more and more men by this point, and my rules had all but gone out the window. Fat, old, ugly, it didn't matter. I was addicted to the win. When you agreed to pay me the number I asked for, I won. I had felt like I finally had control over my body. For so long, I was a loser, and I didn't have control over my body. I was finally able to victimize myself on my terms. I bet you can see where this is going. I tricked myself in thinking that I had control, that this is what I wanted, but it was all a facade. I was coping and reliving my trauma of sexual abuse, the ongoing thrill of putting my body through the rigors for a price I agreed, for terms I agreed, was facilitating a false sense of control. I ultimately met a man who was old enough to be my grandfather. He was an inventor of a technology that many companies around the world use today. This success brought him riches far more than I could ever dream. We met at his second house, a compound on the lake, staffed with 15 full-time employees, a room designated for fireworks, and a full gym in his master suite. I was staying in what seemed like a 5-star resort. We eventually would come to an agreement that I would see him on a regular basis, though I must be open to group sex in more extreme situations. It became all too real for me, and I felt for the first time that I was losing control. I refused to see him again and returned the last check as I felt uncomfortable with having group sex. This was the beginning of the end of my sugar baby career. The next man I saw was an anesthesiologist. He insisted we have unprotected sex, For me, this was a rule that I had not broken yet, and a rule that I didn't want to break. The more I refused and ignored his messages, the more he wanted me. I called him all sorts of names, and it only seemed to excite him more. I ultimately would agree to meet him in a hotel across from the hospital he worked. There was no fancy dinner, the room was not a suite, and he showed up in his scrubs. I would find out that he was on his lunch break. We had unprotected sex after agreeing to pay double my fee. It was a challenge he wanted to conquer, and he had won. As soon as he climaxed, he got off of me, went into the shower, and threw the money on the bed. I felt humiliated and a full-fledged prostitute. By this time, I was rethinking my choices and wanted to get out. It was no longer a thrill. I was no longer in control. The mask had cracked, and I started to see what was really there the entire time. I was never in control. The dinner dates were not real. All of this was not real. I was a toy. Like when I was a child, I got angry and wouldn't let this be my last experience as a sugar baby. I wanted to chase the control and regain the power I once had. I flew to Los Angeles and saw a man who didn't want sex at all. Instead, he wanted me to bathe him. Weird, I know, but that was what he paid for. So it was nice to give my body a break and get paid the same amount. Beginning to feel confident again, I agreed to meet who would ultimately be the last sugar daddy of my life. After work one evening, I agreed to meet a man at his home. Remember the rules? This was my first mistake. I would drive to a gated community and be let in by a smiling guard and wind around impressive estates. I ended up coming up to a stop at a house that was the size of a normal city block, bigger than all the houses in the neighborhood. There was a second gate to be opened to allow me entry. Walking up the stone staircase, I had no idea what I was about to walk into. A frail older man opened the door, took my coat off, and ushered me into a sunken living room. We began to talk and get to know one another. He pours me a drink, and the interview begins. I was number 2 of the day. He had another one scheduled after me. I was to be his Dallas girl. He had women in Fort Lauderdale, New York, and La Jolla. But what he was looking for was a specific type of woman, a woman he could control, a woman willing to play his games. He began to tell me more about these games he likes to play, and more I grew increasingly uncomfortable. He asks to take me to the buildings that he owns throughout the city and have me walk wearing only high heels at night in the back of the alley. I was to be totally nude, walk the length of the alley to meet him at the hood of his car with the headlights on me. He wanted to see me crawling on the ground and walking away from the car and then turn around and lay on the hood. Humiliation was something he needed to feel sexually gratified. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. There was a bedroom off the den. He instructed me to enter and use that bathroom. Thankful for a break in the awkward conversation, I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. What have I got myself into? I can't do anything that he's asking of me. When I opened the door, he was standing in the bedroom. He instructed me to come over to him. I was beginning to feel even more scared as I did before. He spun me around and took off my dress. I was paralyzed in fear. I didn't know what was happening. It all happened so fast. I'm standing in a grand window, naked, when he bends down and whispers he wants to play a game. I wince and tell him I don't think this is something I'm comfortable with, and he responds, "Hush, it's fine. You're safe with me." The game had begun. The rules of the game. You will stand in the window, and when the car comes by, I will perform oral sex on you. He had me petrified. I began to completely check out. As this was close to 6 o'clock, many people were starting to come home from work. I can still hear the smacking and slobbering as he removed his mouth from my privates. Not sure how long this went on until he grabbed me by the arm and took me to the den. He dropped his pants and sat down, pulling my face to his groin. He put his flaccid penis into my mouth and reassured me that it's okay and not to worry. I couldn't tell you how long his penis was in my mouth, but it felt like an eternity. I asked to leave. I told him I was hungry and that I needed to feed my cat. He wasn't done playing, he said. I persisted that I really needed to leave and that I'm very, very hungry. I haven't eaten. He puts his penis back into my mouth and orders food. I sat with his penis in my mouth until the food got there. The doorbell chimes was like heavenly angels coming to save me. I ate and once again explained I had to leave. This time I was insistent.
Oh, I have to leave now.
He went and got his checkbook and wrote a check, folded it up and put it in my purse. With a wet kiss, he said goodbye, and I had escaped my ordeal. I got into my car, drove away. Tears began to stream down my face. I stopped once I got out of the second gate. I had felt raped. I had felt small. I had felt awful. I had never had a sugar daddy experience like this before, and I was at a loss of what to do. I looked up a rape hotline number and I called it. I spoke with the woman and I told her everything that happened and how guilty I felt, that I couldn't be upset because I'm an escort, that I am paid for fantasies, and that this was his fantasy. We talked for hours and I bawled and bawled and bawled, struggling with the guilt. She told me as soon as I said no, it's rape, and escorts can be raped too, and that what happened is not okay. The feelings of my childhood came flooding back, and I was finally done being a sugar baby. I finally opened the check to see what he had given me. Signed $5,000 and 0 cents paid to the order of. The memo line simply said, quote, "You earned it." I sat on the check for a week. I didn't want to accept the money because by me accepting that would have been accepting what he did was okay and that it was worth it. So I went ahead and called him. I told him that I wouldn't be the girl for him and I wouldn't be cashing the check. I asked him to go ahead and cancel it. And he laughed and said,
"Don't be silly. After all, you've earned it."